The Oasis Podcast Live is back. We are coming to Manchester on the 11th of December, FAC 251, featuring the Oasis tribute band, Oasis Supernova, YouTube sensation James Hargreaves debuting his new band, plus special guests, exhibitions, competitions and more. Get your tickets right now, eventbrite.co.uk, or hit the link in the description below.
Alright, it's Liam. I want to thank everyone at the Oasis Podcast. As you were.
One of the things that I originally set out to do when we first set up the podcast was go through like A to Z and do a looking at each of the individual Oasis songs. And I thought A to Z because if you start with, Wonderwall or Don't Look Back in Anger or Rock and Roll Star, it's like, well, you don't want to top load it. So we want to, I thought that was the fairest way to do it really, is just to go A to Z. And really the idea behind this is just to dig a little bit deeper into each of these songs because, as I've said countless times in this podcast, I don't think Oasis music gets the respect it deserves. People talk about them as the band and the relationship between the brothers and the phenomenon of the 90s, but let's look at the songs. Let's look at them in a bit more detail, the same way that we look at the Beatles and Dylan and people like that, because these songs are worth looking at. And so let's start with As Long As They've Got Cigarettes in Hell. Let's have a little bit of that now just to remind you of it. Clarify is, you might be wondering why it's not Acquiesce as the first song in an Oasis A to Z. Well, As Long As They've Got Cigarettes in Hell starts with an open bracket. And being geeky about this stuff, open bracket does come before A alphabetically. So As Long As They've Got Cigarettes in Hell is officially the first track. And Get Off Your High Horse Lady will be the second track. And plenty to say about that. But As Long As They've Got Cigarettes in Hell is an interesting one. So let's just give a bit of a context to the song. So Be Here Now comes out in 97, and the singles off that come out as well, All Around the World being the last one. So the Master Plan compilation album then comes out in November 1998. Now it's very much it follows in the same vein as the first three albums. It's got the old-fashioned Oasis logo. It's got a Brian Cannon microdot sleeve. It's obviously music from that period because it's covering off the best B-sides from that period. So that's the Master Plan album. Then Oasis disappear off, and we don't really hear anything from them until they come back with the Standing on the Shoulders of Giants first single, which was Go Let It Out. Now Go Let It Out then had two B-sides on it, Let's All Make Believe, which has been heralded as a classic, and maybe their best song of the 21st century potentially, and the other one is As Long As They've Got Cigarettes in Hell. So the first thing is it's sung by Noel. It was recorded with Mark Spike Stent, and there'd been a big departure. So in early 1999, they'd gone away. They'd started recording. As I say, no Owen Morris, Bonehead and Griggs both left the band. Bonehead left in August, and then 2 weeks later, Griggs left as well. So the whole of the recording was actually done, really just with Noel, Liam, Alan White, and then the other guys in the studio. So there's no official confirmation on the Go Let It Out single on who plays what on this Cigarettes in Hell track. But the Standing on the Shoulder album sort of gives a breakdown of the personnel for the album. So I think we can assume it's sort of the same personnel. So it's Noel primarily, then you've got Alan White. There's Paul Stacey, Strange Boy. Now he does backwards guitar on Who Feels Love and bass on Who Feels Love, so there's a good chance that he played at least guitar and bass on Cigarettes in Hell. You've then got a guy called Tony Donaldson playing the Mini Moog and Mellotron, Gas Panic, so we can assume that it's him playing the mellotron on Cigarettes in Hell. Yeah, and that's a very a key part of the track, really. The mellotron, which is, if you don't know, it's that kind of Strawberry Fields organ sound. So let's just play a little bit of that.
We found other uses for it, as have many musicians since, and probably the most famous use we as the Beatles put it to was on the front of one of our records, which went like this. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields.
So that mellotron sound is obviously very prevalent in Go Let It Out, and then it's there again in Cigarettes in Hell, and it obviously straight away gives that feeling of the Beatles, because it is it's so reminiscent of Strawberry Fields, you just can't get away from it. So it definitely has that feel to it. And overall, the production, this feels like a big step away from Be Here Now. If you think back to sort of the All Around the World single with the B-sides, The Fame and Flashbacks, and their cover of Street Fighting Man, they are far more sort of straightforward rock and roll with that big Be Here Now, big, huge, beefy sound. Whereas them now, this is something very different. This has got swirly psychedelia, there's backwards guitar, there's sort of strange percussion going on. I say that mellotron all the way through it. This is a different sound. And lyrically as well, this is a very different song. The excesses of the Be Here Now period, which was really celebrating just the fact they were on top of the world. Once we get into the Standing on the Shoulder album, you've got tracks like Gas Panic, Where Did It All Go Wrong, and even Let's All Make Believe from the same single are much more contemplative and much more circumspect as well, and sort of questioning things and questioning the lifestyle maybe. And so let's just read through the lyrics. So, spend your days just walking and shopping, depending on how much your luck is in. Spend the nightlife table hopping and trying to keep that bag of bones in trim. I don't mind not being immortal, 'cause it ain't all that as far as I can tell. I don't mind not going to heaven as long as they've got cigarettes in hell. And by the time we start getting used to the dope that's forming on the windowsill, now we know we've got ourselves into the cage that keeps the mice on the treadmill. And then it just repeats the chorus again. So the first thing that jumps out, and we'll get into this as we look at the other songs, but Oasis songs often have this kind of mentions of God and mentions of religion and heaven and hell. And it's normally in this kind of sardonic, kind of, sarcastic-y, flippant way. I don't mind not going to heaven as long as they've got cigarettes in hell. I don't mind not being immortal. It's it's okay. So it's not exactly poetry, but Noel's lyrics often have this religious edge to it. We know they grew up Irish Catholic, and they all went through the Catholic Church and went through Holy Communion and confirmation and all that sort of stuff. And and it's definitely there. It's whether it's rebelling against it. But there's always that undercurrent of religion in quite a few of Noel's lyrics. And also here, when he's talking about spend your days walking and shopping, depending on how much your luck is in, spend your nightlife table hopping, he's talking about that lifestyle, isn't he? He's talking about the sort of the man about town lifestyle they'd had in that mid-90s. But then when you get to the second verse there, by the time you start getting used to it, the dope's forming on the windowsill. Now we know we've got ourselves into the cage that keeps the mice on the treadmill. So, he's stuck in this lifestyle. And he's bored of it, and he wants to change. And so, which, once again, as I said, that comes through in the rest of the album, whether it's Gas Panic or Where Did It All Go Wrong. Even songs like Who Feels Love or Roll It Over, it's almost like it's going back to like a spirituality, and obviously that's there in the music as well, that kind of psychedelic and that sort of neo-psychedelic sound that's throughout the whole album. So let's just briefly talk about the structure of the song. So it's got 3 chords in it. Simple 3 chords really. It's just C, G, and D, which is like 3 of the simplest chords. Anyone that's learned a very, very basic level of sort of acoustic guitar would kind of get their head around C, G, and D. I mean, I'm not sure, depending on where you look online, and I'm sure the musicians in there will tell me that it's slightly different variations of C, G, and D, but it's effectively those are the main chords in the song. And so there's not a huge amount going on there. And then when you look at the melody as well, Noel does a thing, and this is going to come up when we do more of these reviews, where he tends to just waver between 2 notes. And he does that in here when he says, like, because it ain't all that as far as I can tell. All that's doing is going between those 2 notes. A huge amount more in the song. There's a couple of melody lines in the verses, a couple of melody lines in the chorus. It goes verse, chorus, chorus, and then into the big guitar solo at the end. And the guitar solo, it's not his best, I don't think. It's pretty basic. Repeats the same line pretty much over again with not a huge amount of variation. He's never been, as we've talked about on the show at other times, he's never been the most expressive or over-the-top guitar player. He's no Slash, but, often his guitar solos have got something about them. They're a bit different and interesting, melodic. There's nothing really here. It's just sort of plays the same thing over and over again. And then we go into the outro, which is a bit more interesting, and then we have the coughing at the end, obviously going back to the fact that he's talking about a cigarette. So I put it out there and I asked for your guys' views on the song, and a few of you got in touch. Mark Osborne, who is at Aussie Peeps, said, "For me, Cigarettes in Hell is one of Noel's best B-sides over his entire career. Despite Standing on the Shoulder of Giants getting a bit of a bad rep, I'd say the B-sides from this period are some of the best, along with the lyrics too. I'd say this is the closest Noel got to sounding like the Stone Roses, with the backwards guitar effects, and I love the lyric, 'Now we find we've got ourselves into the cage that keeps the mice in their treadmill.' It's also one of my favourites to play on the guitar." He goes on to say, "By the way, how good were the Standing on the Shoulders of Giants CD singles with the transparent plastic?" Which is absolutely true. If you remember, if you bought those CD singles, as I said before, he was getting away completely from everything that had happened in the last 3 albums, and then 4 if you include the master plan. So completely different design by Simon Halfon, who'd worked with the Jam and various other people. Completely different logo, and then the design of the CDs, they were partially transparent, which just completely different, completely steps away from what they were originally. So thank you, Mark, for doing that. That's great. And I put it out there as well for you guys on Twitter to rate what you think of Cigarettes in Hell out of 5. Now Twitter, when you do polls, it can only do 4 options. So I said, send me a comment to put 1 or 0. And as it comes up, 5 out of 5 was 17%, 4 was 28%, 3 was 37%, and 2 was 18%. And I did the maths on it, and that ends up working out about 3.8 out of 5. At Mark Ovrani said, "Interesting time for Oasis, definitely their transitional time musically, love the B-sides of that album." So Chinatown, who is at Supernova Dragon, said, "Bland and boring, and very much the meh track Noel would go on to make for several years later." Mackie, who is at Chimpad11, says, "Remember that being played on the evening session," and he made a comment about people giving up smokes as a New Year's resolution, which I don't remember that. And then at Foodman Beard said, "I like this B-side, but thought the coughing at the end of the track was a tad cheesy," which is fair enough, I suppose. And I've mentioned before about the Oasis Reddit page, and that's definitely worth having a look at. I haven't been doing much over there, but one of the things they do over there is they do a daily song discussion, and they have actually discussed As Long as They've Got Cigarettes in Hell a couple of times. So let's give you a flavour of what the guys over there were saying. Flat Rate 1 said, "One of my favourite B-sides. I really like the backwards guitar clip that persists throughout the song. Also the build-up to the solo and the solo itself are fantastic. bonus for the guy hacking out his lung at the end. This said pretty weak song as far as NG songs go, however I like it better than its A-side. World 71 Racer said very slow and mellow, not the best that Noel has done, but it's certainly not the worst. It could go well as a B-side, like it does, and it would also go well as a filler album track. It's not really a bad song and does whatever service it needs to. As far as the song, Noel's delivery is almost perfect for this type of song, which isn't supposed to be too OTT. While I'm not accepting of the meaning, I think this is very good in showing everyone a part of what the hangover from Be Here Now was like. As far as it could have ever been placed on Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, I think it would have been a nice replacement for Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, with Let's All Make Believe on there afterwards, instead of Little James, if you want to further go on about alternative track lists. Just a song that does the justice it needs to and moves forward. And the Band 65 said, I listened to this one on the bus this morning and was wondering when we'd get to this discussion. Not a great song, but I realised this morning it's a good hangover song. Pretty mellow, which doesn't really suit Oasis, at least not that type of mellow. It's okay, it's like getting a C- on a test. Could have done better, but it's not a D. And Lord Sifter said, always loved this song, so simple, like a peaceful exhalation. Mr. Xenon 1986 said, it sure follows the rhythm of Go Let It Out, what with the organ and such. Probably in my top 5 post Be Here Now B-sides. I just love the way it sounds. I can imagine a song with a message like this being heavily punk-based if it was in the Definitely Maybe era, but it's 2000 and it's been tainted with the Standing on the Shoulder of Giants sound. Not complaining though, 9 out of 10. A Simple Game of Genius said, it's an okay song, but definitely there are better B-sides. And Semi-Delusional said, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants track listing triggers me to no end, which is something we find a lot. And that was, I think we talked about it with the Nick Amy's episode, that it's such a strange album with such a strange track listing when there were so many better songs around that could have been used. And a couple more responses that came through on Twitter. James Taylor, J.A. Taylor, 1982, said little hint of Strawberry Fields in there. He had a bootleg tape of Go Let It Out before it was released and could hear Strawberry Fields in the background. Whoever recorded it taped it over Strawberry Fields. Neil Dennis, who's at Musical Pedro, said a weak song by Noel's standards, but loved table hopping line. Big Beatles Revolver vibe, hugely inferior to Let's All Make Believe. Romesh Dodangoda, who is at Longwave Romesh, said it's amazing. I love the hiss at the start, 1 second of it, and you know what's coming on. Michael Hart, who's at What a Mind Blast, who's an Australian journalist that we need to get on the podcast at some point, said, I do love this song, but I think it's a big sign that Noel's worldview is now that of a weary insular rock star, which was true. And then Richard Bowes at RickyB123, who does some great articles for us, said the beginning of the bracket era, which I think it's good to be free, had brackets before that, but yeah, I think after that quite a few tracks did come through with brackets in them, as we will come to see as we come to the next one. So I don't think it's one that you hear very often. No one's been picking that as their favourite Oasis B-side when I've been doing these interviews and things, but yeah, I think it's still definitely a place in time. Obviously, it was on a massive selling single and Go Let It Out, so it's been heard by a lot of people. Whether people go back and visit it as much as, you know, say the B-sides from the Master Plan album and things like that, probably not. So yeah, I think it's definitely one that's worth going back to and revisiting.